All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we are going to continue, of course, the set of ahadith that are the short ahadith, and at the same time, Aluka had, let's see, let's look at it right there again. Go number the top of the page. So basically, just 200 ahadith from al-Bukhari and Muslim, which makes it easier that we don't have to research about if its authenticity. Beautifully done, and of course, gathered, I would say, probably the most important ahadith that relate to our life, and it was worth just explaining these ahadith. So we are at 90. We have 110 more, which is pretty good. We've only been doing this for what, 3 days now? So let's do it. Let's continue. عن أبي هريرة أن رسول الله رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: من تاب قبل أن تطلع الشمس من مغربها تاب الله عليه. Let's see. Whoever repents before the sun rises from the west, Allah will accept his repentance. Narrated by Muslim. So two things. There is another hadith where it talks about that if a person repents before the soul and before their soul reaches il-gharghara. What is il-gharghara? Il-gharghara is basically the throat. So when the soul departs the body, it departs it from from down to up. So from the foot area, and then it starts gradually departing the body from the foot up, up, up. And then, of course, we're talking about we're reaching the thighs, reaching the stomach, reaching, then going up farther. And of course, once it starts reaching the lung area, that's what al-gharghara is. So al-gharghara is not the throat per se. It's more al-gharghara when the person goes through the secretions that the person is, of course, now the body is starting to do a lot of secretions, and of course the person is trying to grasp for air. Nasallallahu al-afwa wal-afiyah. And at that moment, of course, the secretions, there's no way to stop it. Even if you were to insert any tubes and probably pull out those secretions, they'll still be suffering from a type of an anaphylaxis, they're not capable of breathing because their body is basically dying. So there's no cure, there's no treatment, because their body right now at that moment is basically dying. And those secretions at that moment is what makes al-gharghara. Al-gharghara basically means that the person is kind of like going through some kind of gargle. That's al-gharghara. Okay, so once they are doing this kind of gargle, secretions, etc., that's basically the moment where it's the end of seeking repentance. Their time had basically gotten to the last minute. Okay, so the other part is قبل أن تطلع الشمس من مغربها. So تطلع الشمس من مغربها, not الشمس, but تطلع الشمس من مغربها. So this is basically talking about when the sun starts setting from the east, and then, well, start setting from the west. Sorry, no, what am I doing here? No, rises from the west and sets from the east. There we go. We got this in place. Okay, that's when we would consider that it would be the end of times, and basically marks the end of a person being capable of repenting. Then they would not be capable of repenting, they would not be capable of seeking repentance at that time, because, so you've got two things. You've got one person, which is considered their end of time, and then you've got also the world end of time, which basically is when the sun sets from the east. That would be considered as the end of time. Okay, تاب الله عليه. So does this actually, when you say تاب الله عليه, does that mean that that's the end of that? As long as the person had done all of this, then they can guarantee that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had accepted their repentance? The answer is no, we cannot guarantee that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted their repentance, but this is a high chance that a person had basically made it on time. So that's what it would mean, that they made the repentance on time. Now the rest is left on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept or reject. Let's continue. عن النواس بن سمعان الأنصاري قال: سألت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن البر والإثم فقال: البر حسن الخلق والإثم ما حاك في صدرك وكرهت أن يطلع عليه الناس. So Nawas ibn Sam'an, and these moments are actually very few, and we know that in the Quran or in general, the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ about 13 different matters. Okay, 13 different matters and no more. Well, why not? Why didn't they ask about more? Go back to the tafsir, and we talked about why they didn't ask about more, mainly because لا تسألوا عن أشياء تبدى لكم تسؤكم. They didn't want a hadith, ayat revealed and giving more restrictions onto them. So what about the other questions? يسألونك عن المحيض, يسألونك عن الأهلة, etc. So those questions were relevant to practicing their faith. It wasn't considered a question where they were just trying to procrastinate or trying to basically ask about things that were not relevant to their life. It was supposed to be asking a question about things that relate to the practice of Islam, relate to the practice of the deen, and making sure that it is within the parameter of seeking ilm that relates to a practice that the Quran or the Prophet ﷺ had basically illustrated. All right, so the other hadith, so this Sahabi is asking the Prophet ﷺ, well, what is al-birr and what is al-ithm? سألت عن البر والإثم. So the al-birr is the opposite of al-ithm. Well, what's the difference? So al-birr is supposed to be any good act that you would do. So a good act, whether we're speaking about the highest level of kindness or whether we're speaking about a high level of a good deed. Al-ithm is basically any bad deed. So here, I guess in Nawas ibn Sam'an, he wanted to ask about, well, what would make something as considered a bad deed and something that is considered of a good deed. So the Prophet ﷺ defined it for him and said, al-birru husnul khuluq. Al-birr is basically good morality. So, but we already know that it's supposed to be good morality. So how is that answering the question? So when we're speaking about birr, we're speaking about the highest act of kindness. But the Prophet ﷺ is basically demonstrating right there, the highest act of kindness is you submitting to the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically illustrated in the Quran and Sunnah. It's basically giving you, in other words, putting in the principles and practicing the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent is in itself the best act of kindness that you could do. Because the Quran itself and the Sunnah would simply demonstrate what it means to be kind to your parents, be kind to your siblings, acting good with the neighbors or acting good with even the animals or the different things in public, that's basically husnul khuluq. So it's basically giving him let's say a comprehensive illustration and telling him, well, the act and the best act of kindness is the more committed you are to such mannerisms, the highest of the level of birr / the highest level of an act of kindness is basically going to be the more you put in of those principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had simply demonstrated in the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ had demonstrated in the Sunnah. وَالْإِثْمُ مَا حَاكَ فِي صَدْرِكَ. So this one is kind of different because if you're saying al-birru husnul khuluq, but al-ithm is taking you elsewhere. الإثم ما حاك في صدرك. Versus sin, the word is haka. What is haka? Haka can mean a couple things. Haka can mean something that is sown, and haka can mean something that occurs. Okay? So ma haka fi sadrik, we're speaking about something on the inside of you. Your instinct is letting you know, and your instinct is giving you an indication or a sign that something is wrong with this act. And that's one thing, is that can our instinct be a source of knowledge, or do we not depend on our instinct? So we could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us al-fitra. So al-fitra itself is basically فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created certain things within your instinct to help you, one, recognize what is good, kind of like a chivalry, or recognize certain things that are good, and had given you an instinct to also recognize if something is wrong. And we're speaking about something ethical or not ethical. But the person's fitra can sometimes get contaminated, whether through the society, or whether through the person's consistent actions gone wrong. It can happen, or whether we're speaking about shubuhat, we're talking about shahawat. So shahawat would be the different desires and pleasures that a person might display or might engage in. So those would be shahawat, and the shubuhat would be the different misconceptions. The different misconceptions can certainly contaminate the person's fitra, and then this fitra that was considered as, let's consider it like a hard drive, like the hardware that is built within you to help you distinguish right from wrong, is then probably contaminated with some kind of an external virus that wasn't actually coming from within. Your hardware was all a built-in hardware to help you tell the difference and distinguish right from wrong to a certain level. Not to an extreme level, but to a certain level. But then this hardware can definitely get damaged, can definitely get, I guess, some kind of viruses coming in, contaminations coming in from, I guess, the outside, can be from the society, can be from shaitan, can be from a person's behavior, etc., and that can contaminate the person's internal, let's call it a built-in hardware, which basically was to help the person distinguish right from wrong, but it can get contaminated. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ was indicating right here, al-ithmu ma haka fi sadrik, that sin is basically what you feel on the inside, that something is basically not right happening, and وَكَرِهْتَ أَن يَطَّلِعَ عَلَيْهِ النَّاسِ, and you would hate that people would see what you're doing. In other words, you're secretly doing something. The only reason why you would somehow do it in such a covert or such a private and secretive, you're so secretive about it, is because you recognize that it's not appropriate. That's the only reason why you would not want anyone to see it. وَكَرِهْتَ أَن يَطَّلِعَ عَلَيْهِ النَّاسِ. So if you don't want anybody to know and see what you're doing, that's a sign that what you're doing is basically not appropriate and certainly containing some kind of deviance. That's one sign. So two signs the Prophet ﷺ is giving us. Number one, you feel internal signals that's telling you that this isn't right. Number two, you would also hate that people would know and would basically see the kind of act that you're doing. Let's go for another hadith. عن أبي ذر الغفاري أو الغفاري رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق. Okay, so it's really weird. Did they miss out on any of the hadith? Okay. Oh, I didn't read the translation English with this one. Let's do it. Righteousness is good character. البر حسن الخلق, good character. And sin is which wavers in your heart, and you would hate for people to find out about it. Okay, well, that's fair. Okay, let's go for 92. لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق. That do not belittle any good deed, even if it is just meeting your brother with a cheerful face. What is لا تحقرن? لا تحقرن, what is the word?
I have a question about the last hadith.
Go ahead, Noura.
Sorry. Okay, so when they want to do like a good deed, don't they want to conceal it as well?
Right, but concealing it for the sake of wanting it to be sincere is different than concealing it because you feel ashamed about it.
Okay, so that guilt is what, okay.
Right, you don't feel ashamed about donating for poor people, do you? No, you don't. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Just like
all right. So concealing it because of shame, because of guilt, because you know that what you're doing is wrong and you don't want people to know about it, that's completely different. I would like to say that during our times, of course, we could see that there is this audacity that a lot of the people of sin are basically trying to convince you that you're supposed to be proud of the sin that you're committing, and that you should not whatsoever hide from it because it's basically you, it's basically your identity and so forth. So you could see that this is a satanic way of trying to contaminate people's, let's call it fitra, contaminate their instinct. Their instinct was letting them know that there was something wrong with this behavior, but then they are playing the game and contaminating the person and the people's fitra by telling them, no, you should be proud of it. It's basically the people's fault that are making you feel guilty, but there's nothing to feel ashamed of. There's nothing to feel guilty about. It's your identity, it's who you are, it's blah, blah, blah. So this is a type of a misconception that, of course, the people of shaitan, let's call it that way, are basically trying to enter the fitra and trying to enter the heart's window in people's minds to tell them that what the fitra signaling is all about is really people's fault, making you feel shy about it, but there's really nothing to be shy about. So can I be shy about wearing my hijab outside, wearing my niqab, or etc.? No, that's not the right thing to be shy about. You're supposed to be shy about a sin, not shy about a good deed. Being shy about a good deed is a type of being a coward. Okay, so when you're practicing a good deed, you should be proud of it. You should stand out and basically right there, stand up and be proud to display the good deed. Unless the person is afraid of...
I just thought of Surah Al-Kahf where
how's that related, Noura? Tell me.
Because they were stuck in the cave and they made dua for the good deed that they had concealed. I don't know. I just thought that like when you're donating money or something, you're supposed to
well, it's not just donating money. In general, you want to conceal the good deeds, okay? But there are certain good deeds that you can't conceal it. Like I can't say, I want to conceal my good deed and wear my hijab at home and not outside. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
All right, that doesn't make sense. There are certain good deeds, they're going to be public, they're going to be displayed outwardly. There's no way. You can't
Yes,
say,
yes, that's
I
true.
don't want to do Hajj because I don't want it to be public. There's no way.
Yeah,
The
of
whole
course.
act
Yeah,
is
yeah.
public.
Jazakallah khair.
There's no way. There are certain acts of good deed. There's no way to conceal it unless we're speaking about, well, I don't want to announce to everyone that I'm going to Hajj or that I'm going to Umrah, and I'm not making these selfies and taking these selfies right next to Mecca and putting it on Instagram or whatever. No, I'm basically making it as a personal thing. It's a personal act. It's a personal relationship between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a completely different thing. Okay. So we have to, put the things within a context. Okay. All right. لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق. What is لا تحقرن? لا تحقرن is, I like that it translated as do not belittle. So what does it mean to belittle? To belittle actually means that the person is regarding it as something that is not a big deal, something that is simple. So a person might probably, they could see trash on the ground and just pick it up and just put it perhaps in the dumpster or something. And they might say, well, it's not a big deal. Come on, you just picked up the piece of garbage and just put it in the dumpster. What's the big idea? It's not like you just made a big thing. Well, no. The Prophet ﷺ says, لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا. Any kind of an act of kindness, any good deed, no matter how small in the eyes of people that was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically give a tremendous reward for that good act, and therefore the person should not whatsoever belittle or consider something as just a small, quote unquote, act of kindness, but consider that, there goes this example, consider ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق, even if you were to just greet your Muslim brother with just a smile. So even if it's a small smile that, hey, I couldn't give him probably maybe buy something, a snack, a meal or something. I couldn't pick him up and probably drop him off somewhere. I couldn't do any of that, but I was capable of giving a smile. But of course, we're not talking about a bad smile here. We're talking about a good smile. We're talking about greeting the person with just a smile. You're probably standing just in a queue and somebody's probably staring at you or something like that. You're just giving a smile. It's like right there, just an act of kindness. Okay. But that's, of course, depending on the context. And unfortunately, I've seen sisters actually say they're giving an act of kindness and smiling at brothers. And I would say, sorry, but that's not an act of kindness. That's a sin right there. So taking this hadith out of context and putting it into a different context is definitely a form of misinterpreting the hadith. Okay, let's see 93. عن أنس رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ما من مسلم يغرس غرسا أو يزرع زرعا فيأكل منه طير أو إنسان أو بهيمة إلا كان له به صدقة. Let's look at hadith number 93. There's no Muslim who plants a tree or sows a seed and a bird or a person or an animal eats from it, except that it is considered a charity for him. Okay. So every single Muslim, whether the person is, planting some kind of a plant, and they might not eat from the plant itself because it might take many years to probably even is yet set ready for harvest. It might take years, but if the person, whether we're speaking about birds eating from it or whether human beings or any animal would be eating from it, and then in that situation, the person would basically get a charity, or it would be considered as if they had given a charity, even though they just planted the tree. And this actually reminds me of another hadith. If you were to throw an arrow or basically pay to make that arrow, or if you were to basically be the person to throw an arrow, basically in a situation of jihad, of course. that this deed, even though we saw a person, one person, which basically was the soldier, hit the arrow, but there were other people that donated for this arrow. In other words, to buy basically the different arms, and another person that was probably making the arrow. All of these three people would be considered that they had invested in the act of jihad or in the good deed. And that's the same thing. So whatever good deed that you would invest in, that's the whole idea. The whole concept of it is that any type of an investment, whether we're speaking about planting a tree, somebody eating from it, or whether we're speaking about any other good deed that you would do and other people are probably involved in it, then in that situation, every single act of investment is going to be considered as a good deed that the person would be rewarded on behalf of the amount of effort that was put in. That's basically going to act as the charity / as the good deed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take in consideration for them on Judgment Day. That's quite interesting, to be honest, and that's from Rahmatullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's from Rahmatullah subhanahu wa ta'ala that even if you were to die, let's take a look at that hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ قَطَعَ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. If the son of Adam dies, then three things, or
Yeah, I was just thinking about that one.
right, all of his actions, all of his deeds are basically terminated, except for three things. Number one, he mentions علم ينتفع به الناس, some knowledge that he leaves behind and people are making use of it. Number two, ولد صالح يدعو له, a good pious son, or basically an offspring that's making dua for them. And number three is sadaqah jariyah. And we're speaking about a sadaqah, an ongoing charity, and people are still benefiting from it. Could be a person probably built a hospital, maybe a mosque, maybe a school, an orphanage, all of that. As long as it's an ongoing in its service, in its benefit, then that would be considered as the person, even though they're dead, but that's going to be continuing their good deeds right there. And I'm just, when we're speaking about a good deed, well, what about a bad deed? Can a bad deed also be considered as continuous? Yes. Even though they're dead? Yes, because in the same act that a good deed can continue, the bad deed, if this person had basically deluded many people, then they're going to carry the sin of the amount of people that they had deluded.
Oh yeah, like the guy who brought the idol originally to.
Absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
Noura, ahsanti. That actually slipped my mind. Good job. Exactly. Like the man that brought the idol to Mecca. Good job, Noura. Okay. عن أبي الدرداء رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ما من مسلم يدعو لأخيه بظهر الغيب إلا قال الملك ولك بمثل. Let's see. Hadith number 94. There's no Muslim who prays for his brother in his absence except that the angel says, and for you the same. Okay. So any Muslim that would make the dua for his Muslim brother, بظهر الغيب. So what is بظهر الغيب anyways? بظهر الغيب means that the person is not present. So you're making the dua. The person doesn't even know you're making a dua for them. And that's بظهر الغيب. الغيب basically means unseen. So the person is not present and you're making this dua for them, and they don't even know that you're making this dua for them. But then you're not the only one that's going to get the reward for this, because the impact, or let's say the outcome of this dua is not only the person that you made the dua for, but the outcome is going to come back to you as well. And that's why the angel would say, وَلَكَ بِمِثْلِ, and may you also have the same. So let's say you make the dua for Sister Umayyah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give her a long life and would give her good health. The angel would say, may you also get a good life and a long life and a good health. You would get an angel saying, for you the same. You would get also the same. And let's continue. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله يقول يوم القيامة أين المتحابون بجلالي اليوم أظلهم في ظلي يوم لا ظل إلا ظلي. يا سلام. There's going to come a time إن الله يقول يوم القيامة, that the Lord Almighty will say on the day of resurrection, where are those who loved one another for the sake of my glory? Today I will shade them in my shade on a day when there is no shade but mine. Beautiful translation. So, أين المتحابون بجلالي? Wait a minute. So when is يوم القيامة anyways? I don't mean by when in terms of when it's going to happen. So I'm talking about يوم القيامة, يوم الحشر, يوم النشر. What's the difference? So يوم القيامة would basically be in the early stages. Okay? يوم القيامة, it's basically coming from قامة, which means long standing. So it wouldn't necessarily be resurrection per se. It would more be a day of long standing, because resurrection, right, I mean, from one sense it can be, because resurrection would mean to come out of the grave. Okay, that would more be, wouldn't that be more as يوم الحشر? The day of resurrection, when you're resurrected, you're coming out of the dead. But يوم القيامة is more speaking about the day when people will already be lined up, okay, and they're standing up, okay? So that's the point where it's called يوم القيامة. That's what I meant, when is يوم القيامة. Because there's المحشر, there's المنشر, right? So there's a time where people are going to يخرجون من الأجداث سراعا. And it was really interesting. The other day I was listening to, his name is Dr. Fadl al-Samarra'i, just an excellent professor in Lugha Arabiya. And he was talking about the word ajdath. He said whenever the ayah would speak about people are coming out of the grave, it would use the word ajdath. That's the only time where it would use ajdath. And he explained the word ajdath, and I never had known that explanation. He said the word ajdath could mean to leave something in a scurry. It's like the person is scurrying to leave something. And the second ajdath would also mean to the sound of munching and eating meat. That one was kind of weird. How is the sound of meat and eating, meat? How is that? That's the sound. It's also called ajdath. How is that at all related to this? He said, because when the person was in the grave, the grave was as if it was eating the person's flesh. And then the person, after being eaten within the grave, like it was as if it was in between those jaws within the earth, and as if it was eating it like the way you would eat meat. And of course, when you're eating meat, you grind your teeth more because it's harder than eating Jell-O. That's so scary. Just think about it. It's so scary. And it's like the person was grinded within the grave. That's why it's called ajdath. And then the person, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order Israfil to blow in the horn, and then the person's body is recollected. And of course, a rain which was described as a rain like semen, then the people are going to grow like plants. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders that the souls would be returned to them. They would be returned, well, the souls would be returned to them. They would then recognize من أخرجنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون. Of course, the disbelievers are the ones that are going to say this. Who got us out of the long sleep? This is what we were promised. And of course, in رواية حفص من أخرجنا من مرقدنا, there's that scene on top of that word مرقدنا. And it's basically sect, just a pause right there to basically demonstrate and resemble the silence, the fear that they would be living in. هذا ما وعد الرحمن. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised. وصدق المرسلون. And the prophets and the messengers had forewarned us about all of this. But for the mu'mineen, no, they would recognize, and they would recognize that we had known that this was going to happen. We had believed in it. So they're familiar with all of the different stages. This isn't news to them because they had believed in it, because they had learned about it, because they had prepared for it. So they're right now not living the same type of fear. But there is not the same type of fear, but everyone is going to be in fear at that moment. Everyone is going to be in fear at that moment. But let's say the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, إن الله يقول يوم القيامة أين المتحابون بجلالي? Where those that love one another for my sake. What does it mean? For my sake. What is the word بجلالي right there? أين المتحابون? So the word أين means where. المتحابون, those that basically love one another. What does it mean to love one another? To love one another means to care about them, to ask about them. What does it mean to just ask? To ask means that if you had known, or if you know that that person is in need of something, you would be there to help them, whether with your money, with your time, with probably the assistance that is needed, or probably you yourself being there maybe to help them feel better if they're going through anxiety, or probably if a loved one died, you would basically be there to give them the support, remind them of sabr, and remind them of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So this is what piece of it, one piece of it. And same thing, if they're probably getting their son married, you're there to celebrate and show that you're happy about probably the celebration, whether it's a graduation or whether it's probably their children getting married or whatever it is. So you're basically being present in showing your support for whether their happiness, or basically giving them basically the solidarity that is needed. Okay, so that's what it means to be mutahab. It's not enough to give simple love. Yeah, I love you, or these signs with these fingers the Gen Z would do. That's not enough. That's cheap love. Real love is when you really are there. Part of that love is that المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. What is أولياء بعض? That they would support one another on practicing haqq. She saw her Muslim friend basically right now struggling with her faith. She would, because she really likes her, she would remind her of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She would remind her that you're going the wrong direction. Wake up. What's happening? You got to change those friends. They're trying to affect you. They're having their influence on you, etc. So that's basically part of love fi sabilillah, is when you support your Muslim brother to be tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bil sabr. They would support one another on al-haqq and on al-sabr. They would basically, on haqq and sabr, basically haqq is that they would support one another to stay on the right path. And sabr would be that they would support one another in being patient, in being committed, and despite all the hardships, despite all the different different obstacles, they would basically love one another, because what they were really wanting is on Judgment Day to be next to one another. They wanted to go together to Jannah. أين المتحابون بجلالي. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would call out, we're those that loved one another for my glory. So what does it mean to love one another for the glory? The glory means that there is another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, سَبَعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. That there are 7 that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shed his shade upon them. And one of these 7, he said, رَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّا فِي اللَّهِ. 2 men or 2 women, they would love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean to love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What it means is that the reason why we're joining together, we're working together, we're supporting one another, is because we're trying to perhaps learn Islam together. We're probably reminding one another. Sometimes we can have our shortcomings. Sometimes we can probably have a moment of maybe not as active. So we would say, hey, come on, you could do it. Well, I want you to be with me. Let's go. We're going to do this, etc. And what are you doing here? Because you like that person. You like that. And here's one thing. So when we like somebody, is that just an inner feeling? Or is there something that basically just about their behavior? It's basically 2. There are 2 things that make you love a person. Number 1, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, that one's quite interesting. And it really is hard for me to explain, because scholars really had differences of opinions on that. Let me bring out that hadith. So the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith had actually said that al-arwahu junudun mujannada, that the souls are junudun mujannada. So when you say junudun mujannada, we're speaking about spirits. You're talking about somewhat of having an inner type of power.
Yeah, like you feel like you've known that person forever, right?
Right, like you had known that person forever, but then in how is it that ما تعارف عليها ائتلف وما تناكر منها اختلف? I mean, what does it mean that they had known each other? When was that? Was it, some scholars actually said it was before people were created, that they were created from the same soul, before even the creation of mankind. Well, what does that even mean? That's the part where I don't really have an explanation for. And even the scholars that went in certain details, really, they don't really have an evidence. So I don't know what basis they based it on to say that before the creation was created, that the souls, there were some souls that were created from the same piece and they would recognize each other. I know that there are scholars that actually say that, but to be honest, I haven't found any evidence to support that. And I don't know where they got the interpretation from, but it's quite interesting. I don't know if there's any trace to something that is mawquf / marfu' or anything of that sort, but it's quite interesting. Just wanted to, I guess, display what they had said, and I'll just leave it at that. and said that there are certain souls that were created from the same, I guess, from the same soul, or created from the same spirit, or something that is similar, and then they would somehow click together. And metanakara, and some are basically coming from different sources, and then they would basically hate one another. But then, that would really contradict where sometimes we would start out as enemies and then we would become best friends. So how does that happen? I thought, if it can happen. We'd start out as enemies, and then in Arabic we say the best love is basically the one that's after having some kind of an animosity. They would be. And it can happen the other way as well. They would be best friends, and then all of a sudden, they would discover the reality of one another, and then they become worst enemies. So how does that happen? If these souls were created of one soul, and that's why they love one another, then it should be considered as forever love, forever hate. But then that doesn't necessarily happen, which actually tells us that a contribution, a person's behavior, which basically would resemble and display the person's inner akhlaq, the person's inner behavior, the person's inner reality, when that comes onto the surface. And of course, certainly that tells us that the best of the things, or the best of the factors of why one would be loved or one would be hated, is basically their actions. Their actions would make you love them or would make you hate them. If a person is showing, showing people, maybe making them feel insecure, maybe attacking them personally, or maybe attacking them in their back, or whatever it is, and then this person is basically going to hate that person because they would recognize that this person is not a place of security for me, is not a place of safety, is not a place of where I could feel in not only safety, but where I could feel that with this person, I can feel that I'm safeguarded, or whatever it is. In other words, one of the best ways to bring about people's love onto you, one, is making them feel secure. That's the first thing. That's why the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, وَلَوْ أَن تَلْقَى أَخَاكَ بِوَجْهٍ طَلِقٍ. Why? Because with a smile, you're letting the person know that you're not concealing any animosity. You're not concealing any hate. You're not concealing any insecurity to basically lay out on that person. So that takes us to, of course, this piece, which basically the person, to make you, or to make basically the person love you, is making them and letting them know that you are there to keep them secure. And even when we're speaking about husband and wife relationship, if you look into the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had, mentioned as the husband and wife relationship is وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And that's a sukoon right there. And even if we're speaking about the husband and wife relationship, of course, the media is portraying us all about lust. But the Quran portrays it that what really brings love is really a sense of sukoon. That's what brings love. The man would let the woman make her feel that she is protected, that she is safe, whether we're speaking about her deen being safe, her health being safe, her mental health being safe, and certainly chastity and money, everything is basically under control. So that's the man's side. And the woman's side as well. That the man is not worried that his deen, his children's deen, etc., that we're speaking about, this is basically part of our instinct. part of the man's instinct is that he wants to basically have this security for his home, security for his children, and that's the same thing for the woman. It's basically part of our instinct, whether human instinct or even animal instinct. We would have that. So when you look at the ayah, when it talked about the husband and wife love, it talked about that what really makes that love is really the state of sukoon. What is a sukoon? A sukoon is basically calmness. A sukoon is tranquility. A sukoon is stability. That's sukoon. And that's one main thing. Because in order to understand even the man's psychology, it's all about you being as calm as possible. As a woman, be as calm as possible. Be as, I guess, choosing one, whether we're speaking about right time to speak or whether we're speaking about right time and right tone to say different things, because your main duty as a wife is to make this home display calmness as much as possible. Display calmness as much as possible. The more calmness you display, the more, of course, the husband is basically going to feel that security. And that's how you're going to bring in the love. That's why the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith had described that the female, or the zawja salihah, basically the pious wife, إِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَيْهَا سَرَّتْ. If he looks at her, he's happy. She's displaying beauty, a smile, care, even if it's these simple things. إِذَا غَابَ عَنْهَا حَفِظَتْهُ فِي نَفْسِهَا وَمَالِهِ. And when he's gone, she's basically maintaining the house, maintaining the different things, maintaining herself as well. So that's basically right there, living that security. And once you give security, that's when you will guarantee that love will come in. Love comes when the person feels secure with you. That's how you can guarantee it. It's not the fake love of, I don't know, roses on the bed and I don't know, candles being displayed here and there and all these different lights and all of that. That's too fake. That's not what really makes love. This is what social media would display as really romantic. Romantic is not in fake love. It's the inside. It's not about how many candles you display.
And you have to work at it, subhanAllah,
you have to
right?
work at it. You really have to work at it. To work at it actually means to show that you are patient when he exerts those times of probably a bad mood and a tantrum. He's going to have those times where he's probably just going to a tantrum and you're like, this is not the guy that I married. Something is wrong with him. Hey, he's still a human being. To really show that you really care, to really show that you are going to be patient is really demonstrating that you are willing to, I guess, embrace that moment of shortcoming. Willing to embrace the moment of shortcoming, willing to embrace it actually means willing to be patient when they have their shortcomings. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described it. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. What is حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ? حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ actually means that they would preserve الغيب. الغيب is a very general statement. In other words, their shortcomings, you don't display it. My husband does this, my husband does that, and go displaying it publicly. You're the only one that knows about this sin. Don't display it. You know that they have this attitude. You know that they have this sin. Don't go announcing it anywhere. You are the only one that knows it. It's you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You could do your piece of da'wah, but make sure that you don't make this as a public matter as much as you can, not even to your family. Learn how to fix it within yourselves, because he's got some things that he also has about you. You would hate that he would talk about it to his family, and you would hate to say it displayed publicly as well. He's got that responsibility, and you've got that responsibility. Now, having that being said, what really makes love is making that area of security. That area of security, that area of, let's look at that ayah again. ومن آية خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة. جعل بينكم مودة. What is مودة? Is مودة supposed to be مودة? Is that supposed to be love? No. Mawadda is supposed to be a type of warmth and a type of affection. And that's why it added an annex to that mawadda as rahmah, mercy. When is mercy needed? When a person probably maybe goes too old, maybe goes sick, the situations don't stay the same. And certainly, maybe they got sick, but you are, alhamdulillah, you're healthy. And that's your rahmah right there, that you want to support this person and maybe lost a job. He lost the job, tried to get the job, but then things are not working right. He's trying to get things working out, but then, hey, the money that we used to spend is not the same. But then that rahmah, that you would recognize that I'm going to be patient, I need to support, we'll work together, we'll make this happen. It's not the end of the world. I'll continue to give this rahmah. And yes, I'll reduce on the expenses just because I want to make sure that he doesn't feel behind with the spending. So we'll basically work together. Yes, we're going to cut down on the expenses. Yes, we're probably going to need a side job. We're probably going to maybe change the way that we're probably eating and drinking and etc. just because we have to cut down on our expenses, etc. That's basically mawadda and rahmah right there. In other words, whether we're speaking about perhaps the person not being in the same power, financial power, not the same power in terms of probably physical power, etc., to have that rahmah, to have that mercy. Same thing with the wife. It's not just the husband. Same thing with the wife. It's part of rahmah. She's going through probably postpartum, helping the woman while she's, I guess, enduring those pains, and probably went through a C-section, probably got her period, and you want to remember. Same thing for a woman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically, for a female, during her cycle, she doesn't pray and doesn't even fast. So those are considered two pillars in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically, and even when it comes to tawaf, told her you can't do tawaf either. Even if you're in Hajj, don't do tawaf. And what is that telling us? Well, that's basically telling us right there that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismissed her from major responsibilities, even though, hey, if you were to leave salah, for example, the Prophet ﷺ said, al-ahdu baynana wa baynahum tarku salah. Leaving salah is the difference between a mu'min and a kafir. But for a woman during that moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically dismissed her from fasting, dismissed her from praying. So in other words, dismiss her at that moment from certain home duties and probably pitch in and help in making her feel that you understand that she's probably going through cramping, probably going through certain cravings, through maybe mood swings, etc. Just embrace it. That's not the time. In fact, the part about even divorcing when a woman is during her period, many scholars actually consider that divorce is considered as talaq bid'i, that it's a type of an invalid divorce. Why? Because the situation in itself during that moment is not in its, let's call it stable / normal sense. And by the way, it's important to mention that the actual mood swings, the actual changes don't happen during, they actually happen 2 or 3 days prior. Just keep that one in mind. Okay? So it's not that, oh, she's got nothing, she's just whining about something. No, the actual mark happens 2, 3 days before the cycle. And that's when the change in the mood swings, the cramping, all the different signs basically start to go on the surface, basically prior to the actual period. So embracing those pains, because at the end, the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِنِسَائِهِ. The best of you is basically the best to his wives. That's what you display at that moment. That you embrace, just like you want to expect her to embrace your suffering, whether it's an illness and whether it's, of course, if a man's illness, when a man gets a flu, it's like to him, it's equivalent to a woman getting a baby, right? Because we endure pain a lot more. Okay, let's see. أين المتحابون بجلالي اليوم أظلهم في ظلي. What is اليوم أظلهم في ظلي? We're those that basically love one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today, I will shade them with my shade. Well, wait a minute. So if there's a shade, why is the shade even needed? Why? Because there's going to come a time where the sun will get really close to people's heads and they will sweat based on their sins. The more sins that they had committed, the more sweat, to the point that the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, that some of that sweat is going to be إلى حقويه, and some of them يلجمه العرق إلجاما, that some of them, the sweat is going to be up to their ankle, others it's going to be up to their waist, and others it's going to be basically covering them completely. Are they capable of dying if it's covering them completely? The answer is no. There's no dying on Judgment Day. That's it. That's the end of death. It's just suffering. Ya Rabbi, that's so scary. Imagine you're, so, Ya Rabbi. Nas'Allah al-afwa wal-afiyah. Okay. So when we're speaking about al-mutahabbuna bijalali, those that love one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's definitely no better love than husband and wife love. No better love than husband and wife love, if it's basically hub fillah as well. They're loving one another, supporting one another for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's basically hub fillah. يوم لا ظل إلا ظلي. On that day, when there is لا ظل إلا ظلي, there's no shade except the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wait a minute. So if there's no shade except the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why isn't there any other shade? Because in order to make a shade, you would basically have to have something that obstructs the rays that are coming from the sun. Is it the same sun that we have now? No, it's not. It's a different sun. Okay? And there's nothing that is going to be on Arasat Yawm al-Qiyamah. There's nothing going to be on the fields of Yawm al-Qiyamah. So, therefore, there's nothing to shade. There's nothing to obstruct. And the only thing that can obstruct is basically the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us part of those. Ya Rabbi. Allahumma ameen. Okay, the ayah, Noor is asking, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. O you who believe, some of your wives, your children are enemies to you, so be careful of them. And if you were to forgive, you were to dismiss, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most forgiving, most merciful. So in regards to this ayah, this is it. Remember, it said inna min. This min is called litab'id. It's not for all, Some could be an enemy to you. Some of you, the husbands, could be an enemy to the wife.
Jazakallah khair.
Right. So this is the min. Inna min azwajikum. This is called tab'id, which basically means not all, some. Some of the children, maybe, well, she's worried about her son. So because of her, let's say, deep affection and deep emotion to her son, probably she's afraid that he might disrupt his sleep, not wake him up for Fajr, for example. All right. So that would be, in that situation, that would be, hey, he's an enemy to you right now because you were putting that affection in the wrong place. Okay. And perhaps you are trying to give up on some of your Islam because perhaps you didn't want to embarrass your son when you went to school. So you let go of some of your religious practices. That would be aduwwan lakum. It was a pressure. And you succumb to the pressure that was coming perhaps from the husband or the children. In other words, family could be an enemy to you. Any submission in succumbing to any pressure, whether that was coming from your family, whether that meant husband or children, and succumbing to that pressure at the expense of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles is basically considered as a sin. That's when they would be considered an enemy. If you had succumbed to their pressure at the expense of Islam, at the expense of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the expense of the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what this ayah would mean. But that's not every single husband and every single wife is an enemy to you. No, it said min, which basically means some. Yes, it can happen that some husbands might maybe ordering the wives to maybe take off their hijab, or probably not even practice Islam, or probably maybe, hey, I want you to smoke with me, or whatever it is, okay? So that would be this display that's coming in, okay? So let's see. The other hadith, oh boy, that we just passed it. Let's at least do this one, okay? أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. أولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم أفشوا السلام بينكم. لا تدخلوا, you would not enter Jannah until you believe. That tells us that, yes, a kafir cannot enter Jannah. Wait, they can't enter? Yes, no kafir can enter Jannah. In order to enter Jannah, you have to be a believer. Okay, a believer in what? الإيمان بالله ملائكته كتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر. Okay, ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. And you would not believe until you would love one another. So how is that even related? لا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. In order to really demonstrate true faith, that, of course, we didn't say حتى تصلوا. Well, that was mentioned already in other accounts, in other hadith, telling us that faith comes with a certain number of different actions to be demonstrated, to be put into practice. But the Prophet is also including لا تؤمنوا حتى تحبوا, until you would love one another. How does it happen that they would love one another? How is that even displayed? He said, well, should I not show you off to something? If you were to practice it, it would basically enhance love and affection between you. أفشوا السلام بينكم. Spread as-salam, spread peace between you or amongst you. So what does it mean to spread peace? Is it just to say Assalamu alaikum? Or is it to really be kind, maybe to the neighbor, kind to your family, your siblings? And what does it mean to be kind? What it means to be kind is, it's so easy to be kind to somebody that is kind to you. That's inevitable. You're going to do it that way, okay? But to be kind, remember the ayah. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان. العدل, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders that a person would display justice, and al-ihsan. Al-adl would be that we're speaking about justice. I basically had done something good to you. Now you're going to pay it back in return. Simple. Fair is fair. Al-ihsan is that no, I didn't present a good action, but you presented a good reaction, even though the action from my end was actually not the best. But
now is this just between Muslimin?
So, good question, Noura. There's, in terms of dealing with the kuffar, it depends. All right, it depends on al-kuffar. So, if this kafir person that there is, let's say, hope that they would be, they would find probably Islam, they would want, just a kind of like a good, kind gesture to get them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that would be the best, that would be a good deed. But then, in general, regardless of the person's faith, you know what, even if it's an animal, in general, regardless of the person's faith, you're supposed to act in justice. Remember the ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَا تَكُنْ لِلْخَائِنِينَ خَصِيمًا, and don't be for the ones that betrayed. Don't be basically in support to them. And those were the munafiqeen. And we talked about this in details. Okay? And it was in support of really a Jewish man. It was in support of a Jewish man. So the Prophet ﷺ was supposed to stand against basically these people who were demonstrating that they are Muslim. But the truth of the matter is that they were actually hypocrites. But then it was in order to basically get the Prophet ﷺ to rule in their favor against the Jewish man. But then the ayah was basically saying, وَلَا تَكُنْ الْخَائِنِينَ خَصِيمًا. Don't basically stand in favor of even those that might display that they're Muslim, and stand against, even if it's a Jew. What you're supposed to be displaying is justice. Okay? And when you look at that, so in general, with the disbelievers, with the believers, disbelievers, we're supposed to support justice. Simple as that. That's the default. But with the disbelievers that we are at war with, okay, the disbelievers that we're at war with, if we are to demonstrate and spread peace, then you're not then being peaceful. You're being a coward. It's just one fine line difference. Because if this person, these people that you're at war with, they're just waiting for the second that you would go weak. And during that moment, that you display weakness when the person in front of you is about to attack you, that's not being kind. That's being naive. That's being plainly stupid in giving the opportunity for al-muharib, for the person that is at war with you, to seize the moment to attack you. This is not being peaceful. This is being naive. Okay? And it's just a fine line. It's a fine line. So we have to be wise in how we demonstrate. And when we demonstrate those moments of course, peace. I'm not saying be unjust with them. but we're saying that we have to basically, with the disbelievers, then it basically takes into a number of different accounts that we would have to take in consideration the different circumstances. Okay. لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا أولا أدلكم على شيء إذا فعلتموه تحاببتم. So how do we get into loving one another? أفشوا السلام بينكم, spread peace amongst you, because that's the way. Not just blood relatives, of course. But, there's in Islam, the blood relatives are not necessarily the strongest bond, Noura. Remember the ayah when Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. When Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, remember, you're talking about it's rainy, it's dark, and the waves are going really up high. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam basically tells his son, اركب معنا. And then he says, سآوي إلى جبل يعصمني من الماء. I'll go up on a high mountain. It's going to protect me from all this wave. And then he tells him there's no way. They can't run away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا عاصم من أمره. That's it. There's no running away. And then حيل بينهما. That's it. حال بينهما الموج. فكان من المغرقين. Then the big wave basically comes at them, and he ended up basically drowning in this wave, in the flood. And then Prophet Nuh alayhi salam cries out, "Inna bani min ahli," my son. Wanted to somehow, I guess, intercede for his son, but he didn't say it straightforward. He said, "Inna bani min ahli." Is there anything that I could do about this and just save him or anything? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, "Innahu laysa min ahlik." He's not from part of your family. Why not? "Innahu amalun ghayru salih." The act that he had done, the commitment that he was basically holding on to, which is kufr. "Innahu amalun ghayru salih." And then he says, إِنِّي أَعِظُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I warn you to be amongst al-jahilin, those that would consider that the blood relations, or the, let's call them materialistic relations, are basically the key to making any bond. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching and basically right there telling Prophet Nuh alayhi salam that the bond of al-Iman is the true bond. And that's basically the bond that on Judgment Day would basically right there be the actual bond that people will take in consideration. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those people that would be mutahabbuna fillah, make us from those that would love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us from those that would always connect to remember hadith. I was going to do hadith yesterday too, because I just felt I couldn't let a day pass without me doing hadith or tafsir.
SubhanAllah. And I just realized, SubhanAllah, when you were talking about the Nuh alayhi salam with Ibrahim alayhi salam, it was talking about his dad, and with Habil and Qabil, it talked about the brother. So yeah, subhanAllah.
Yeah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, make us from those that are mutahabbuna fi sabilillah, mutahabbuna bi jalalillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that will always be connected to learning the Quran, learning the Sunnah, and inshallah we'll continue tomorrow with tafsir. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت